Juan! Juan! Crack! 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 Sos un crack! This is what coach Jose Pekerman yelled to his playmaker Juan Fernando Quintero to congratulate him for the insane final pass that led to Colombia's second goal. Juan, you're a genius. Or as we Spanish speakers like to say, you're a crack. And I'm not one to disagree with Pekerman. Quintero is a genius, a crack. One who imagines and executes passes we would never even think of. But like many other tortured geniuses, up to now Quintero hasn't shown the world everything he's really capable of. A couple of years ago, he seemed more interested in becoming a reggaeton singer than a football player. This lack of consistency forced Quintero to return to South America from Europe, and now he's playing for River Plate in Argentina. But over the last 18 months, Quintero seems to have found his footing again. He's been playing better and better. In March, he finally returned to the Colombian national team after a 3-year absence. And in this World Cup, he is shining more brightly than ever. The football gods are giving Quintero an unmissable opportunity in this tournament, and he's making the most of this chance. After difficult personal times, Quintero has once again decided he wants to compete against the best. And these are wonderful news for football fans. It seems Juan Fernando Quintero, a crack, will give us many more stories to talk about here in the Football Engineer Podcast. Hello everyone, welcome to the Football Engineer Podcast. I'm your host Jose, and today we're going to do a bit of a belated podcast on Matchday 11, Sunday, June 24th. So that day I did return from my event early enough, caught up on the matches, wrote the reviews. Took me a bit longer to edit and record, so that's why I'm releasing it today. But don't worry, to compensate for it, you're getting this Matchday 11 and the Matchday 12 podcast on the same day. And we're going to be ready for Matchday 13. And the other announcement is simply that when I started writing my mini reviews on Twitter, it was thinking about doing a bit of a script that I could use for these podcasts, but now those mini reviews are turning into full-fledged reviews, and what I write on Twitter is becoming a bit redundant with what I say here on the podcast, so if you follow both, it will be pretty much the same. But don't worry, I'll keep working on that so that you can get as much different content as possible. And being done with the announcements, it's time to go for the first match of Group G, England versus Panama. Alright, time to go into England's win 6-1 over Panama. And I'm going to start by talking a bit about Panama, what they do, who they are, how they play like. I thought Panama is in the bottom 2 to 3 teams in the World Cup in terms of the quality of the players, their game plan and how they execute it, and competitive mindset in general. You see, most of Panama's players play in the American MLS or in their native league, and they have a simpler attacking plan, a lot of long balls into space, a bit of counterattacks. And because this is Panama's World Cup debut, they are a bit noob when it comes to competing in World Cup. So the expectations of the country weren't too high to begin with. And I know all of this sounds really harsh, but it's just that I'm a fellow Central American, I'm Honduran. And, oh, by the way, I swear I am not angry at the fact that Panama kicked us out of the World Cup. That's a different story. But it's just as a Central American, I'm mostly disappointed by the quality of our Central American teams. Other than Costa Rica, really, who have been doing a great job over the years. And I like to say that because I think that both my native Honduras and Panama are sort of poor man copies of Costa Rica, just that we have less tactical discipline and less talented players overall. For example, almost half of Costa Rica's squad is in European leagues, while most of the Honduran and Panamanian squads are, again, in the MLS or in local leagues. So, following the example of Costa Rica, Panama uses a low defensive block, and they attack with simpler long balls into space for their strikers, and again, from time to time they can strict a good counterattack or even a good organized attack, but in general, the team lacks a bit of creativity. Again, this is a bit different from Costa Rica, who does everything better and has the added flair of the creativity of, for example, Brian Ruiz. But despite the issues of the Panama side, at the beginning of the game against England, England's defense suffered a bit more than they should, mostly because the back three, Walker, Maguire, and Stone, were making some mistakes when playing out from the back that generated Panama counters. Fortunately for England, Panama is not particularly good at finishing either, but that's something that should be noted because a more talented team could take advantage of those mistakes. But soon after, England started controlling the game as it should, and that's when they scored their first goal from a set piece, from a corner. Which makes me go into the entire thing about English set pieces, which has been mentioned a lot in media. I think that what Southgate is doing with set pieces is nothing particularly new or revolutionary, but I just think it's really cool to look at all the effort that he and other managers put into set piece preparation. And in this case, I say this because there was a story by journalist Daniel Story. Story's a good name for a journalist, isn't it? It's a story about how Southgate actually studied NBA strategies to prepare his set pieces. And in general, I think it's very positive for England that they finally have a manager who has really, who imprints a very specific football identity in his team. England has a very well-defined playing style, and these little details, like set pieces, just make what England do even better. Now, going off from set pieces, in terms of just their actual open play and sort of possession game, England still had some trouble breaking Panama's low block. The one thing I noticed is that I feel there are too many people on the wings and too few people in the center trying to break down the center lanes. And the only people I saw in England that had an idea of like going through the center, Henderson, who's basically the midfield controller and sort of the one whose long passing decides the direction of attack for England, and probably my man of the match for England, Jesse Lingard, who was the one moving in between the lines and through the center lanes because he knew that that's where he could do the more damage. And he got a great goal out of it, very much deserved. And I hope that England, at least in future matches, does a bit more of that, of attacking the center lanes instead of just trying to overload the wings. Now, because other than that issue with the center lanes versus the wings and the defensive issues that I mentioned at first and the mistakes from the back line, I think it's a bit hard to draw more conclusions from England in that match. Panama and Tunisia had been sort of vulnerable teams defensively, so it becomes really hard to gauge how good England and Belgium really are, because they didn't really face competitive teams that made them suffer. So I would still be curious to see how England and Belgium do against stronger opposition before we can actually go and say, oh, these guys are real favorites for the World Cup. They can get to semifinals and so on. Right now, I wouldn't venture to say how far these guys can go before looking at how they perform against a stronger rival. That being said, as I already mentioned, Southgate has been doing a great job as England coach. And their match against Tunisia, in which they napped that last-ditch goal and got the result, tell us that perhaps this England might make it. This might be the England for which things stop going woefully wrong. And that they are a team that might be able to prevail when, things don't go their way and compete well and overcome those kinds of adversities. So I am actually very excited about seeing how England will perform in the knockout stages, and I am very excited about their Group G finale against Belgium because that will give us a bit of an idea of how them and Belgium will perform against stronger teams. That being said, if both of them field their substitute squads for this match, it will be a bit harder to draw conclusions. But anyways, it will always be fun to watch good teams like those two. And talking about good teams, it's time to go into another match with really good teams. Japan versus Senegal. So this match that Japan tied with Senegal 2-2 is the kind of match that makes the World Cup great. It's a clash of everything, a clash of players of different attributes. It's a clash of East Asian culture versus African culture. It's a clash of different playing styles, of the verticality and off-the-ball organization of Senegal versus the possession game of the Japanese. And again, it was a game full of different moments of both teams dominating. It had drama, it had goals, it had good football. It's what we watched the World Cup for. So I'd like to begin talking a bit about Senegal, who they started both halves pretty strongly, with good pressing, stealing the ball from Japan, and trying to create counterattacks and good direct play. For this game, Senegal manager and meme, Aliou Cissé, tried to adjust things compared to the Poland match. Against Poland, he used a 4-4-2, and in this match, he used a 4-3-3. I presume because he wanted to have a bit more midfield control against Japan's good possession game. Obviously, he had prepared. So Senegal had their front three, Mané on the left, Niang as the center forward, and Sarr on the right, who often teamed up with the young 19-year-old Wagué. And keep that name in mind. And Senegal's idea with the 4-3-3 and pressing and trying to stifle Japan's possession game worked at first during the beginning of the game. And it made Japan suffer because Japan is a team that doesn't really like to defend. You can see how the back line gets a bit nervous, the keeper gets a bit nervous, and that's very much how the first goal happened when a double clearance mistake from one defender and the Japanese keeper were turned into a goal. Now, once that happened though, Japan's reaction was outstanding, and that's when really the possession game started working. And Japan's possession game is always a joy to watch. The mechanisms of it are fascinating. So Japan usually starts with their great double pivot on the ball, Makoto Hasebe and Gaku Shibasaki. I find it very interesting that Shibasaki takes this role as a central midfielder in a double pivot when, for example, in Getafe, where he plays in La Liga, he tends to take a more offensive role, almost as a forward or as an attacking midfielder. I honestly didn't know that this version of Shibasaki as a central midfielder existed, and I love it. I think, actually, it suits him a bit better, at least when it comes to the on-the-ball game. Now, these two guys in the double pivot are the ones who are passing long and short and in all directions, and they try to invite the press from Senegalese midfielders and try to open up space behind those midfielders, and these spaces were occupied by Shinji Kagawa, who at first I thought he didn't have a good match, but upon a closer look on the match, I saw that he had an excellent match moving between the lines and attacking the spaces left in between Senegalese lines. And I'd also like to talk about quite a character, Japanese striker Osako, who I like to call him the Japanese Benzema, the guy who has an outstanding link-up play outside the box, but just like Benzema, once he gets into the box, everything becomes cloudy and the finishing is not good. But again, watching him play and participate in Japan's attacking build-up is great. And then to make Japan's attack wider, then you have two fullbacks, I talked about them last time, Nagatomo from Inter and Sakai. And they also have, of course, Takashi Inui, who Inui is really sort of the star player in Japan. The guy who's incisive, the guy who's aggressive, the guy who's probably the best finisher in the team. And I was a bit disappointed from Inui's performance against Colombia. I thought he didn't do enough, but against Senegal, he was the man of the match. Not just because of the goal and the assist, but he's exactly what Japan's possession game needs. That extra bit of aggression and finishing for their plays. So going back to Japan's system, these wider players are the ones who gave some more passing lanes to the guys at the double pivot, to Shibasaki and Hasebe. Once the double pivot spotted that Inui and the fullbacks were in good positions, wide, deep positions, that's when they threw these beautiful long balls that went deep into Senegal territory and disordered their defense. And that's where Japan's goal in the first half came from, which was beautifully finished by Inui. Now, as I said, Senegal dominated the beginning of both halves, and we saw that in the second half too, with the added bonus of Mane trying to take leadership and trying to help his team create chances and attack. But it didn't take long for Japan to go back to dominate again. With their possession game, we got a bit more of Osako, the striker, trying to generate chances. Unfortunately, as I said, Osako is not a good finisher, and he had a couple chances that he didn't finish properly. Now, then Senegal gets the second goal, which, I mean, I don't like to use this word, but it is a bit undeserved if we consider gameplay. They really weren't dominating then, which was scored by the young 19-year-old right back I told you about, Wage. Now, after that, what I love is the reaction of the Japanese manager. Quickly, quick changes, good changes. He substituted Kagawa, he substituted Haraguchi for Okazaki from Leicester, you guys know him, and Honda, we also know him. So the two more aggressive attacking players. And that helped Japan a lot. That these were players who were loading the box, were occupying Senegal's box, and that was exactly what Japan's attack needed at that moment. So, and that ended up paying off with the goal that tied the game. All in all, I very much like Japan's match. We had a team that plays really well. They used the possession game to compensate for their issues in defense. They try to create good possessions high up the pitch so that they don't have to be sitting at the back and withstanding attacks, which again, Japan is not particularly good at. Again, they have good team chemistry. They have a smart manager. They have good impact substitutions with Okazaki and Honda, and they have a great competitive mindset, reacting every time to Senegal's goals. As for Senegal themselves, I mean, I like how Senegal plays, but I think today's conclusions are a bit more negative. Of course, they always have a good organization, but I think the main thing that's always in my mind when I looked at that match is that Senegal were a bit too conservative. I just felt that they didn't press enough, that Japan's playing from the back could be disrupted a bit more with more aggressive pressing, and Senegal just seemed a bit too comfortable just sitting back and waiting for counters and just trusting that the direct play over their forwards would get the job done. And to me, that might have been a bit too much. Japan pushed them back way too much, and it really reduced Senegal's counter-attacking potential. Now, we'll have to see what happens for the next match, but I'd have to say that for now, I prefer the Senegal with the 4-4-2, like the one we saw against Poland with practically 4 attackers, than the Senegal of the 4-3-3. I think the 4-4-2 is a better fit for this more direct and vertical play that Senegal likes to practice. And that's it for the review for the match. I really liked it, and I think it's going to be a big shame that out of Group H, only 2 teams can make it out of Senegal, Japan, and the guys we're going to talk about right now, Colombia. And finally, we have the final match of Matchday 11, Colombia defeating a poor Poland by 3-0. Now, of course, as an actual competition of a match, this wasn't that entertaining, but what was really entertaining was watching Colombia's attacking system finally click, finally play well. I have to be honest, I had been watching Colombia since 2014, since the World Cup, because they played really well there. And then I followed them through the two Copa Americas. I followed them through the South American qualifiers. And they didn't play well at all. There wasn't good chemistry. There wasn't an attacking system that really clicked. And by the time this 2018 World Cup arrived, I genuinely had little hope in Colombia. They had great players, but they never seemed to find that attacking system. And now this happened. In the middle of the World Cup, we get this. And it was beautiful, and the entire match and Colombian people in the stadium celebrating was just a great celebration of Colombian culture. After the third goal, you actually had the camera focusing on René Higuita and Carlos Valderrama, some of the legendary Colombian players of the 90s. It was just great, so you even had nostalgia there. I loved it. And Colombia achieved this great game by betting on talent, by putting their two most talented playmakers together, James Rodriguez, who's already a known quantity for all of us, and Juan Fernando Quintero, who I talked about during the opening. Now, both of these players are probably natural number 10s, very South American kind of enganches, and the dominating narrative in Colombia had always been Quintero and James cannot play together. They are too similar. They're going to step on each other. So the key here for this match was to find a distribution of space that could allow them to not step on each other. And this was done by putting Quintero in sort of a deeper role closer to the right and James in a more advanced role closer to the left. So the way this would look like, the way Colombia's midfield play would look like was a bit like this. You had first a double pivot in Colombia who would look for Quintero. Quintero would be the guy who would help start the attacks, to start moving Colombia forward. And if he found good through balls, then Quintero could find Falcao, could find James, could find Cuadrado. And then the entire team would start moving towards the final third to create attacks. Meanwhile, James, of course, would be more in charge of the final third, he would be closer to the final third, closer to creating chances. And this distribution of space worked beautifully, especially after the 20th or 30th minute of the game. Quintero starting finding through balls, well, genuinely everywhere. He found through balls in the middle of the pitch through Poland's pressing lines. He found through balls in the final third through Poland's defense. It was beautiful. And again, you had like the combinations with James, you had the combinations with Falcao, who I'd like to talk about now, because Falcao showed us in this game that he's far more than just your traditional center forward who's just in the box. This game was an exhibition by Falcao of his entire game outside the box. It was Falcao dropping deep into midfield zones to act as a pivot point for James, as a pivot point for Quintero. And it was him helping make his attack deeper and wider. He often moved wider to, for example, provide a passing lane and hold up the ball. Overall, it was a very complete match by Falcao in terms of link-up play. And then he gets that Colombia's second goal and his very first goal in a World Cup, which was a great moment. And the entire goal was beautiful because it was a combination of everything. It was Falcao dropping deep into midfield zones to pivot, then him running into the box, even adjusting his run very smartly, and then finishing the chance that he himself created. It was great. It was everything that we love about Falcao. One of the world's best center forwards, really. And at this point where he isn't in that big of a team, I guess, a lot of people might underrate him, but he can play anywhere. He can really play anywhere. And finally, Colombia's third goal was actually scored by Cuadrado, who is the last name I'd like to talk about in Colombia because he deserves it. Cuadrado sacrificed himself throughout the entire match in defense. It was him running throughout the entire length of Colombia's right flank. You see, Cuadrado was the key player in Colombia's off-the-ball organization because when defending, Colombia tried to take 5-2-3 shape to counter the width of Poland's own 3-4-3 formation. when Colombia's defense recovered the ball from Poland, that's when Cuadrado rushed forward, and his position switched from the right wingback position that he was taking in Colombia's 5-2-3 into a right winger position that turned Colombia's system into the nominal 4-2-3-1. And of course, it's Cuadrado. His decision making on the ball can always be better, but just the way he committed himself to the team and his sacrifices, they were great. And now I'd like to give some farewell words to Poland that was a true disaster. In the end, Poland started the tournament with a 4-4-2 trying to accommodate Milik and Lewandowski up front. Didn't work against Senegal. So against Colombia, the manager shifted to the old 3-4-3 that they used for the European qualifiers, and that didn't work well either. Poland's game on the ball was terrible. It was them mostly just throwing long balls at Lewandowski, who he didn't have that good of a game, mostly because he was being constantly outmatched by Davinson Sanchez and by Jerry Mina in center back. He constantly lost those aerial duels. And in general, apart from Lewandowski, just all of Poland was very terrible. Their off-the-ball organization and defense was terrible. They weren't compact. They left gaps in between the lines that Quintero, James, Falcao exploited. And finally, I guess I'd like to talk a bit more about Lewandowski, who I think he showed leadership. He wanted to change things, but it almost seemed like he couldn't, as if he lacked the football in his boots to change anything. And that's very worrying, because it shows that Lewandowski has become maybe too much of a specialist, too much of a center forward in the box, but he can offer his team very, very little outside the box. And it's a diametrically opposed to the case of Falcao. Lewandowski could barely drop into midfield zones and help his midfield teammates. And sometimes he tried, and it didn't work out. So again, that worries me, because it sometimes seemed like Lewandowski wanted to help, wanted to do things, wanted to move his team forward, but he couldn't. So it changes my perception a lot about Lewandowski, and most importantly, the context in which he can decide matches. It means that you have to get the ball to Lewandowski in the box so that he can be decisive. And in that sense, he is less complete than other center forwards like Falcao, like Kane, like Agüero, or as we're seeing in this World Cup, like Diego Costa. And I just like to finish by saying that Poland is, up to now, pending what Argentina does, they are my worst underperformer of this World Cup, unfortunately. So I guess with this, I'm pretty much done reviewing the matches. As always, follow Twitter for the mini match reviews that are turning into mega match reviews. Follow whatever I write on Quora. Follow the YouTube channel, The Football Engineer. And I'll see you very shortly for the reviews of Matchday 12. Thank you for listening to the Football Engineer podcast, and talk to you later.